Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Tlatelolco. On October 2, 1968, in Las Tres Culturas Plaza, the main square within the Tlatelolco neighborhood in Mexico City, took place one of the worst massacres in Mexican history. Thousands of students from Mexico's main universities gathered there for a pacifical protest against the government's actions during the last months. Unknown to the students, the Mexican army placed snipers in the buildings and prepared an ambush using the Olympia Battalion, an elite branch of the Mexican army. The president, Gustavo Díaz Ordaz, ordered the army to suppress and silence the student movement in time for the 1968 Olympic Games. What ensued is one of the darkest episodes in Mexican history up to this day. Thousands of individuals were arrested or murdered. A large number of survivors were reported as disappearances and never seen again, a common tactic for the Mexican government back in the day. 2 decades later, on September 19, 1985, Mexico City was struck by a magnitude 8.1 earthquake which caused the Nuevo Leon building, one of the tallest in the neighborhood, to collapse with dozens of people still inside. People living close to Las Tres Culturas report encounters with shadows lurking in the corridors between the buildings, sounds of children playing and plastic balls bouncing in the night, blood seeping from stairwells during rainy days, as well as the agonizing screams and pleas of those murdered during the 1968 massacre. PIC related, La Plaza de las Tres Culturas. The Forest of Chapultepec. One of the most well-known places in Mexico City is the Forest of Chapultepec, a park housing several museums, a zoo, an amusement park and a couple lakes inhabited by waterfowl and carps. The forest has its share of stories, ranging from packs of feral dogs and rabid squirrels, to the famous house of Tia Toña, Aunt Toña, a popular urban legend among teenagers and young adults. Electronic voice phenomena EVPs have been recorded by employees of the Chapultepec Zoo and played in the horror radio show known as La Mano Peluda. The recordings contain whisperings, chains being dragged and other unnatural noises. However, the central piece of the forest is the Chapultepec Castle, an imposing fortress built atop a hill, and where significant events in Mexican history have taken place. During the 1840s, a group of military cadets fortified and attempted to defend the castle against an American invasive force. In 1860, the emperors Maximiliano and Carlota lived there. Workers of the castle assure that Carlota's ghost continues to wander the castle halls to this day, searching for her executed husband. Night watchmen tell stories of hearing steps, doors opening and closing on their own, and Carlota's piano after midnight. Other witnesses, from visitors to the military cadets guarding the place during the day, have seen shadows and ghostly figures moving around the place. La Moira. La Moira is the name given to a house located in the neighborhood of Chapultepec. Abandoned today, La Moira is, according to urban legends, one of the most haunted places in Mexico. The original legend dates from the 1970s, and talks about a kid named Marcos who trespassed into the house after hearing about it. Inside, Marcos supposedly witnessed paranormal activity, but what made him run from the place in fright was the sight of a hanged child in one of the upper floor's rooms. Years later, Marcos decided to return to La Moira, in order to reassure himself that everything was part of his childish imagination. Marcos never came out, and his body was eventually found hanged in the same upper floor room where he supposedly saw the dead child years before. Other stories talk about black magic rituals, black masses and even demonic possession taking place inside the walls of La Moira. Eventually, the owners decided to capitalize on the popularity of the house and started giving nocturnal tours of it. The tours stopped after a while due to mysterious reasons, and the house remained abandoned for a few years, when it was reopened as a cultural center that, much like the nocturnal tours before, closed under mysterious circumstances. The Witch's House. Located in the famous Roma neighborhood, the Witch's House is a large building designed after European castles and palaces, and has been inhabited by Mexican celebrities like Silvia Pinal and Mauricio Garces. The Witch's House was home of a witch and diviner known as Pachita, who used to be consulted by politicians and members of the Mexican entertainment industry in the years after the revolution. According to some people living in the house to this day, the ghost of Pachita still appears walking down the hallways. Mexico City's International Airport. Behind the airport's runway, there's a place where all non-functional or retired planes are stored. Some airport workers tell stories about a little girl who appears among the planes, playing with a ball and sometimes even talks to them. During the construction of the airport's second terminal, a security guard found a little girl sitting in a corner of the unfinished building. He reprimanded and asked her to follow him to the exit, but the girl only stared at him and whispered, "Tie my shoelaces, please." The guard looked down and, much to his horror, saw the girl had no feet and was actually floating in the air. The Devil's Alley. In the Mixcoac neighborhood, there's a narrow alley that used to be surrounded by trees, to the point where the branches closed above and darkened it, fueling a legend about the devil showing up in the alley after midnight. Supposedly, a man who boasted about not being afraid of anything, even the devil, was challenged to walk through the alley at night. Much to his surprise and fright, he was met by a shady, deformed figure resting against one of the trees. The men ran away, scared after hearing the entity's laugh. Another popular story talks about a woman in white, who appears to be passing vehicles in streets near to the alley. The woman supposedly has been guilty of several accidents over the years. Pic related, a photo taken by employees of the airport. The girl was supposedly inside an old Pan Am airplane. El Zócalo. El Zócalo is Mexico City's main square. Surrounded by the Metropolitan Cathedral, the ruins of the Aztecs' main temple and the government palace, it's one of the oldest places in the entire city, dating back to the days of the Spanish conquest. People wandering through Zócalo at night are used to talk about a woman who joins them as they walk, even making small chats as they cross the square and the surrounding areas. But, as soon as they realize something's off, the woman disappears among the crowds. On a curious note, those who mention walking next or talking to her are unable to remember her face or the exact details of the clothes she wore. Don Juan Manuel's house. In the street of República de Uruguay, a few blocks away from El Zócalo, there's a house where a popular story took place back in the days of the Spanish colony. According to the legend, a jealous man named Juan Manuel sold his soul to the devil, in exchange for gaining the knowledge of her wife's lover. The devil showed up and instructed Juan Manuel to step outside his house at 11 p.m. and wait for the first man who passed by. So he did. Juan Manuel waited, hidden, and stabbed the first man he saw. However, the next day, the devil appeared to him again, mocking him about killing an innocent man, but instructing him to keep killing people at the same hour until eventually the right one showed up. Every night, Juan Manuel waited in the dark, and as soon as a man came closer, he stopped him and asked,
"Excuse me, what time is it?"
11.
Joyful the one who knows the hour of his demise.
According to the legend, Juan Manuel still appears at 11 p.m. in front of his house and repeats the same routine. Anyone answering his question will supposedly die in the spot. Insurgents 300 building. Between the Medellin and Insurgents Avenues, in the Roma neighborhood, stands a building that was incredibly popular among Mexico's elite back in the 60s. Movie stars, singers and intellectuals lived there during its heyday. The 15th and 16th floors are haunted by the ghosts of people who died in a fire. The ghost passengers. It's not unusual for cab drivers in the zones of El Rosario, Claveria, Calzada de los Misterios or the bus stops located between the Tacuba and Pantones subway stations, the Central de Abastos, a fresh product market, and Cerro de la Estrella, Star Hill, to tell stories about mysterious passengers boarding the cabs after midnight, only to disappear as soon as they arrive to their destination. Most stories mention older ladies, men and children, all of them wearing black clothing or covering their faces with hats or veils. A popular legend mentions a young woman boarding a cab in front of a cemetery's gates. The driver, confused about picking up a woman in such desolate and dangerous place at night, takes her home, but before arriving at the destination, the girl says, "I don't have money. But if you come tomorrow, my parents will pay you." So, the driver returns the next day, and as he explains to whoever opens the door, he's told that the girl he describes passed away years ago. Circumstances might vary, depending on who's telling the story, and that he met her ghost. Pick related. Insurgents 300 building. Juarez Hospital and La Planchada. One of the oldest hospitals in Mexico, the Juarez, is famous for being the place where the legend of La Planchada originated. La Planchada, the Ironed Lady, the Ironed One, is a ghost nurse who has the unusual feat of appearing in hospitals all over Mexico. Her story varies from person to person. She might be a nurse in love with a doctor that rejected her, and ended up committing self-end. A nurse who killed her patient in vengeance for being rejected, or a nurse that was killed by the doctor himself. A more modern version mentions she was one of the victims of the 1985 earthquake, when the Juarez hospital collapsed and dozens perished inside. The name comes from the fact that she appears wearing a perfectly ironed uniform, and she might walk, float or have no feet, but she's always described as moving silently. La Planchada appears to patients during late hours, and gives them a pill or medicine that somehow heals them, no matter what their disease or condition. When patients mention their encounter to a doctor or another nurse, they're told that no member of the staff was present or guarding the room at such an hour. The woman in the river. Back in 1992, the body of a woman was found next to a sewage river in the township of Naucalpan, north of Mexico City. Since then, people passing through the area at night mention encounters with a floating woman without visible feet, wearing a white dress. Bolivar's apartment. An apartment located in the corner of Bolivar and 5 de Mayo, close to the Zocalo. It remains uninhabited, and previous occupants and neighbors tell stories about otherworldly noises coming from inside, as well as heavy objects being moved or dropped by unseen forces. The ghost of Azteca Stadium. Watchmen in the Azteca Stadium tell stories about a kid appearing during the night, asking for help. When watchmen or staff come closer, the kid disappears. It's believed that the kid died crushed in a riot during a football match. The Concepcion Convent. During the Spanish colony, a woman named Maria Gil fell in love with a young man named Urrutia. Her siblings paid Urrutia to leave the city and drop any idea of marrying Maria. She in turn was forced to become a nun, but couldn't bear the suffering produced by such a failed relationship. So, one day, she got a rope and hanged herself from a peach tree in the middle of the Concepcion convent. The legend says that her ghost started appearing some time later, looking like a rotting corpse hanging from the same tree where Maria committed self-end. The nuns chopped down the tree and prayed every day to make the spirit leave. The Children of San Isidro Graveyard. In Azcapotzalco, a northern borough of the city, there are stories about two ghost kids appearing in the San Isidro graveyard and its surrounding areas. The first is known as Nanny, and is described as a young girl who appears outside the graveyard wall and is prone to causing car crashes in the Manuel Salazar Avenue, by suddenly popping out in front of them. The second is David, who appeared to undertakers, asking them to tell his mother to let him go, because she visited his grave every day. The Mexican Ghostbuster, Carlos Trejo, supposedly taped a video of Nanny appearing in the graveyard. La Casa de los Azulejos. In the corner of Madero and EJ Central, there's a building known as La Casa de los Azulejos, House of Tiles, which is a restaurant these days. A few years ago, a remodeling project went awry, because construction workers were supposedly harassed by a dark shade floating around the hallways. Patrons and restaurant staff talk about the same shade that floats up the main stairs and vanishes as soon as it reaches the second floor. The boy in the theater. In Mexico City's theater, sound technicians avoid wearing headphones while working, arguing that as soon as they put them on, they can hear the sound of a ball bouncing closer and closer, followed by the voice of a young boy inviting them to play with him. Pablito. In the restaurant Ixchel, located in a Roma neighborhood, there's the story of a kid named Pablito, who it's believed to have died many years ago by falling from a service stair. Pablito makes pranks, plays with water faucets and moves chairs. A few watchmen have quit after seeing him. There's a dish dedicated to the ghost, in order to appease him. The restaurant of Santo Domingo. The staff working in this restaurant, the oldest in Mexico City, accept the place is haunted, but say that the ghost is completely harmless, and according to the restaurant owners, it might have been a monk that inhabited the place before it was turned into a restaurant. A popular story among waiters and cooks, it's that the ghost appeared to a reporter some years ago, making her run away from the building. The Bride of Regina 39. In 1940, a young couple was about to get married. On the wedding day, the groom was nowhere to be seen, as he had overslept after a bachelor's party the night before. Furious, the bride cancelled the wedding and returned to the vecindad where the groom used to live, a building located in the number 39 of Regina Street. There, she stormed into the groom's apartment and stabbed him to death. The bride committed self-end afterwards, but people living in the building have reported seeing a ghostly bride pacing back and forth the hallways, lamenting what she did. The Weeping Tunnel. In the township of San Pedro Barrientos, north of Mexico City, there is a structure known as the Castle of Barrientos, which is a military college today. Under the castle, there are tunnels where you can hear crying and sobbing, supposedly from victims of organized crime. There are bones sticking out the walls. Most of these tunnels have been closed by authorities of the military college. The ghosts of El Torrillo de Cuatro Caminos. Until last decade, one of most recognizable and famous landmarks in Mexico was El Torrillo de Cuatro Caminos, a huge bullfighting arena crowned by a massive silver dome that could be seen from miles away. A few years before it was demolished, TV series and movies were filmed inside, as well as Halloween events. People working in the Halloween event, a haunted maze in the tunnels beyond the arena, constantly reported sightings of bullfighters covered in blood, doctors walking hurriedly through the rooms, and malfunctioning animatronics and electronic devices. Pic related. Torrillo de Cuatro Caminos.
My dad was bus driver from Morelia, the capital of the state of Michoacán, which is located in the deep south of Mexico, approximately 4 hours from Mexico City. On his last shift, his bus route needed him to go to a ranch in the middle of nowhere called De Santiago, which was around 2 hours from Morelia. I've been there once, it's fucking shit. But lots of people from there commute to Morelia to work. and have him stay in that small town's bus terminal. That way the next morning his morning shift will have him start in Santiago and bring people back to Morelia. So many bus drivers do is bring their blankets, some beers and food, and just call it a night and go to sleep in their buses. Anyway, my dad was sleeping in his bus when out of nowhere a loud bang on the door was heard. My dad looked at his watch and it was past 3 a.m. The door to get in the bus was locked so that no one was to get in. There were 2 loud bangs on the door and my dad yelled out that this bus is out of service. Then the banging stopped. My dad was about to knock out when again more loud banging on the door, but this time louder. My dad got mad and yelled that this bus was out of service and that the first bus leaves at 7 a.m., all while still in the bed. Then he heard an old lady say from the outside, "But I want to leave now. I've been waiting a long time to go home." Then a couple more bangs on the door. My dad, fed up, stood up from his bed and walked toward the front of the bus while looking over the windows trying to see the old lady. He then yelled, "Lady, I told you that the first bus leaves at 7 a.m. and terminal isn't even open." He opens the door of the bus to confront her and there was nobody. "I cabrin?" He looks around and there was nobody, except other buses and an empty terminal with like a few security guards on the other side smoking cigarettes. My dad said he walked around looking for the old lady and found nothing. When he woke up, he approached the security guards asking if they saw some old lady wandering around late at night. They looked at him weird and told him that about 6 to 7 years ago some old lady was waiting on a bus in terminal to go back home in Morelia only to have a stroke or something and then die on the chair she was sitting on. They buried her in Santiago and not in Morelia, and so many bus drivers at night are awakened by the old lady who just wants to go home. My dad never drove that same route again.
The San Juanico disaster was an industrial disaster caused by a massive series of explosions at a liquid petroleum gas, LPG, tank farm in San Juanico, Mexico, outside of Mexico City, Mexico, on 19 November 1984. 1. The explosions consumed 11,000 cubic meters of LPG, representing 1/3 of Mexico City's entire liquid petroleum gas supply. The San Juanico disaster was one of the deadliest industrial disasters in world history. The disaster was initiated by a gas leak on the site, likely caused by a pipe rupture during transfer operations, which caused a plume of LPG to concentrate at ground level for 10 minutes. At 5:40 a.m., the cloud reached the flare and ignited, resulting in a vapor cloud explosion that severely damaged the tank farm and resulted in a massive conflagration fed by the LPG leaking from newly damaged tanks. The explosions demolished houses and propelled twisted metal fragments, some measuring 30 tons, over distances ranging from a few meters to up to 1,200 m. Much of the town was destroyed by the explosions and ensuing fire, with the current statistics indicating 500 to 600 deaths and 5,000 to 7,000 severe injuries. Radiant heat generated by the inferno incinerated most corpses to ashes, with only 2% of the recovered remains left in recognizable condition. For bonus points, the non-recognizable corpses, the large majority, let me remind you, were buried in a mass grave, and then a park was built on top of it. My mother was alive when the accident happened. Whenever asked, she tells when she woke up, she believed the explosion was very near. The place where that happened is like 2 hours away from her home, because with every explosion, the windows was shaking as in an earthquake, the floor trembled and the light was enough to see clearly on the streets.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.